episode of The Practical Patriot. That's me, I'm Marissa. Last week we talked about virtue, and we talked a little bit about Abraham Lincoln in that one evening last minute reading that I did. I thought that was very appropriate on that date. But today we are going to stay positive, because if I'm one thing, I'm positive. So I'm going to talk about words today. How words have meaning. How words evoke emotion. What else do? They evoke all sorts of emotions. They give us passion. They express what we think. They help us be creative and use our imaginations. They are the utmost importance in communication, which is vital for life. Communication is. That's because language is beautiful. I love language. We as humans have the great gift of being self-aware. Isn't that wonderful that we can be self-aware? And we have the gift of thought and imagination, like I said before. So how are we using words? How do we use our words? That actually sounds like something I'd say to my children now. How do we use our words? Let's use our words when we're explaining ourselves instead of hitting our sister. But when we use our words, what do we use them for? Are we using them to convey a feeling? Are we trying to manipulate somebody with our words? Are we using our words in lies or in those manipulative ways to try and get what we want out of a situation? Remember, we talked about self-preservation. That's a big thing. Well, how are we using our words to preserve ourselves? What do words even mean? Words have meaning, and how we use them is important. I think one of the examples that I like to give is how we use the word love. How do we use the word love? I love tacos. I do. I love tacos. Tacos are my favorite. I love my dog. I love my husband. My son would probably say, I love pizza, because he could eat pizza every day. I love my husband. I love the Lord. We say love to all of those things. I love red shoes. I love combat boots. I like regular boots. Any kind of boot. Some people might say, I love cars. I think love is one of those words that we overuse in the English language, especially in America. Maybe not other places, but here in America, we overuse the word love. And what happens when we overuse a word? It loses its potency, right? And what was one of our definitions of virtue last week was having potency in what we say and what we do. And when we overuse words, they lose their potency. And even what we say can be lost if we overuse words in our language. For example, I have a 13-year-old. She says the word like all the time. I'm sure if you have children, you would notice that as well. The word like comes into a lot of sentences in inappropriate ways. Every other word is like, instead of using the word like properly in a sentence. Also, using the word when people don't know what to say, they use the word I noticed in the video I made last week, the one that was not quite so planned, I used the word a lot, and I am one who tries not to do that, because I think that silence in a sentence is fine when you're trying to figure out what to say instead of filling the space with We don't need to say do we? See, that silence was fine. So here I said oh, that's hilarious. Hilarious. What is the definition of love? The definition of love, according to Merriam-Webster dictionary, is strong affection for another, arising out of a kinship or personal ties. 2, an attraction based on admiration or benevolence or common interests. 3, a warm attachment. I think that's the one we use the most when we speak about loving things like shoes and tacos. A warm attachment or enthusiasm, like devotion or love of baseball, football, soccer, whatever. The number 3, the object of attachment or devotion For example, fishing was his first love. Or a beloved person, a darling, often used as a term of endearment. Unselfish, loyal, and benevolent, having concern for the good of another, such as fatherly concern of God for humankind, brotherly concern for others, and a person's admiration of God. What is the 2 greatest commandments that Jesus said? To love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If we can't love ourselves, we can't love our neighbor. It's true. So I think that's one of those words that we overuse, that loses its potency, is love. Love is an important word, in my opinion. And and that's one of the things I'm working on in my life, is not saying love so often when it comes to things like tacos and coffee, because I really like coffee. You know, as people, maybe we can think, this isn't coffee today, by the way, it's just water. Maybe we can think about the words we use often and see if we're using them in the right context, because of the way words evoke so many different kinds of emotions. And emotions are high all the time in today's society. People seem to be ruled by their emotions. And what stokes those emotional fires? Words do. The words that we hear from our family, the words that we hear on social media, or the words that we read on social media that people are typing. The words that we read on a text message, the words that we hear from the news media, whether it's the mainstream or the not mainstream. Every side is trying to pull at your emotions one way or the other in order to manipulate you into thinking one thing. Words have power, and words can be weapons. So we ought to be careful with the words we use, I think. So when I'm talking about being careful with words, I'm going to go to the Declaration of Independence. I think that the founders probably chose their words very carefully when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. So I'm going to read some of it. I want you to think about the words that are being used here, because they have meaning. Words have meaning. They don't just evoke emotion and explain things. They have meaning, which is why they explain things. So the Declaration of Independence starts. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just the first part. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think that's so important. The truths are self-evident. They are endowed to us by our Creator. We are born with these rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, not the guarantee of happiness. The government cannot guarantee our happiness. No person can guarantee our happiness. Our happiness is in our own hands, not somebody else's hands. They're endowed by our Creator. These are the words that they used. These words have potency and they're important. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, not to guarantee us those rights, right? They didn't say to guarantee us these rights of life and liberty and happiness, governments are instituted to give us those rights. No, those rights are inherent, and the government is there to secure them. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's us, the governed. that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, remember we talked about what despotism means. It means a ruler with ultimate authority, or a government that has the ultimate authority. The same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Now, I am not saying we need to alter our systems of government. I'm saying that we need to stick to them. We need to stick to our forms of government. And yes, I'm reading this out of my little pocket constitution again because the Declaration of Independence is in there. It's important. It's important. Why did we fight for freedom? So we could have liberty and not be told what to do. Although we are all told what to do. So those words were carefully chosen words: life, liberty, happiness, the pursuit thereof. That government secures those rights. It doesn't guarantee those rights. That it's nature and nature's God that entitles us to them and to our opinions. That all men are created equal, which is why we ended slavery, because that wasn't equality. It wasn't equality that people were enslaved to other people. And now we're in a similar kind of a situation where we have to think about the words that we're saying. We have to think about the words that we're saying, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. There's a lot of words that are being thrown around by the media, by each other, that are being taken out of context. They're being used with much hyperbole. They are being used as weapons against one another to shut down the speech of others. And I'm going to give you a big list of words for you to think about how you hear them, in what context you hear them, and how they're being used to get an emotional response out of you. Excuse me. So before we go on to that, I'm going to talk about words and emotion, because that's what words do. They convey our meaning, and they invoke emotion and imagination. So I'm going to read a few things. I'm going to read some poetry. I'm going to read some children's literature. And I was going to read some Shakespeare, but I don't think so. I think I'm going to skip that. I've got a quote from Shakespeare that I'm going to read at the end, which is good. So I'm going to start with this short poem right here. In my poetic diction book that I'm reading currently, this is a great book. It has some poems at the beginning, then it talks about them. But I like this one. It evoked a good sense of imagination. So listen to it and then rewind and listen to it again. See what kind of mind picture you see when I read this. My soul is an enchanted boat, which, like a sleeping swan, doth float upon the silver waves of thy sweet singing. And thine doth like an angel sit beside a helm conducting it, whilst all the winds with melody are ringing. Isn't that a beautiful poem? It's beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Here's another one where I should have marked the page. Oh, there it is. This is Shakespeare. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few do hang, Upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. Gorgeous. Gorgeous. Here's a poem that is not so written in verse. This is from a poetry book called Cornstalks, Bushel of Poems. This one is by James Stevenson. It's called Coney Island Movie. The movie place called The Shore closed years ago, says a man on the corner with some time on his hands. He says it was the best. Double features all day long. I'm wondering, if you didn't like a movie, could you stand on that fancy balcony and watch the Atlantic Ocean rolling in and let some popcorn drift down 7 stories to the street? Good one. Here's another fun one. This one is called The Ascent at the Diner. Somebody small and brave left his base camp at the pink paper plate, trekked across slippery green pickles, climbed over the jagged chips, grabbed an onion curl, and swung across to the lower bun. He slogged through mayo, mustard, melted cheese, then crept up Burger Cliff and on to upper bun, and on the summit proudly stuck a small blue flag of cellophane. Isn't that fun? Makes me hungry. I haven't had lunch yet. But isn't that good? And here's another one called Little League. In the park, the fathers teach the kids everything they'll need to know. How to catch, how to throw, how to hit, and how to tie their shoes. What different emotions and different pictures, imagination pictures that these poems can give you when you read them. Just like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence gives us a picture of patriotism and how our country started. Here's an example from children's literature on how words evoke emotions. This is from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I love children's literature. I almost grabbed Alice in Wonderland because it's so crazy and I love it, but I didn't. I thought this would be a better example. Edmund was on the other side of Aslan, looking at him all the time, at Aslan's face. He felt a choking feeling and wondered if he ought to say something, but a moment later he felt that he was not expected to do anything except wait and do what he was told. "Fall back, all of you," said Aslan, "and I will talk to the White Witch alone." They all obeyed. It was a terrible time, this, watching and waiting and wondering while the lion and the witch talked earnestly together in low voices. Lucy said, "Oh, Edmund," and began to cry. Peter stood with his back to the others, looking out at the distant sea. The beavers stood holding each other's paws with their heads bowed. The centaurs stamped uneasily with their hooves. But everyone became perfectly still in the end, so that you noticed even a small sound like a bumblebee flying past, or the birds in the forest down below them, or the wind rustling in the leaves. And still, the talk between Aslan and the White Witch went on. So many imagination pictures in those words and how they're put together. What words mean, how we put them together, important things. Very important things. So, when we overuse words, I said this before, they lose their potency. How we put together sentences and how we use words is important in how we communicate with one another and what we're trying to say. What words do we hear most often today? I have a list. What words do we hear most often in the news? Let's just say in the news, on social media. We're in a very time of upheaval in our country, and we've got to keep it together. We've all got to keep it together, right and left and center. So what words do we hear? We hear the words freedom, liberty, protest, sedition, insurgent, riot, terrorism, racist, facts, evidence, triggered, bigot, misogynist, socialist, snowflake, free speech, existential threat, communist, insurrection, coup, victim, murder, male, female, and truth. Those are a lot of words to think about. I would suggest taking some of those and thinking about how often they're used, in what context they're used, what emotion is the person saying them trying to get out of you. Is it hatred for your fellow man? Is it resentment for how you've been treated in some way? Is it fear to get you in line? Is it fear to control you? To make you feel out of control? To make you depressed? To make you enraged? Think about it. I want to talk about the word truth. So, what does truth even mean? Why do we tell the truth? Is it my truth? Is it your truth? Is it the truth? Those are lots of words we hear today. Well, that's my truth. Or no, that's just your truth. That's not my truth. That phrase drives me crazy because there's no such thing as my truth and your truth. There's my experience and there's your experience. See how words have meaning? My truth and your truth, that doesn't work because there's only one truth. The truth is the truth. And we'll talk about the definition of truth in a minute. The truth is the truth. But my experience with the truth is different than maybe your experience with the truth. So the key word there is experience, not just truth, because there's only one truth. And finding the truth nowadays is hard. It's hard to find the truth. So I got to look for it from lots of different sources. So what does the truth mean? The truth means the body of real things, events, and facts, or actuality. In actuality, what is the truth? It is what actually is real, the facts. The state of being the case. 3, it is often capitalized. It is a transcendent, fundamental or spiritual reality. It could be a judgment, a proposition, or an idea that is true or accepted as true, such as the law of thermodynamics. That was in my definition. The theory of relativity, right? That's just a theory. That's not a truth. We see it as a truth. That's what it's talking about. The body of true statements or propositions, the property of being in accord with fact or reality, fidelity to an original or to a standard, like you are being true to your morals, you are being true to the Constitution, which is what we always hope for our Supreme Court justices, that they are true. They stand in fidelity to an original or to a standard, which is supposed to be the Constitution. Sincerity in action, character or utterance, or archaic. Fidelity, constancy. So, let's think about truth. Are we free? What do some of these words mean that I said before? What is the truth about the word riot? What is a riot? I'm not going to give you a definition. You can look it up. What is the definition of a bigot? Have you been called a bigot before? Does it feel good to be called a bigot? I have been called once. Someone once called me a colonizer, which I am not. It's the furthest thing from my mind to use words or say something that would be perceived as trying to be a colonizer. And so that was very hurtful when someone called me that. And that isn't the truth, because that's not who I am. And I'm sure there are people out there who have been called a socialist. Let's say there's lots of people on the right now who want to call everyone on the left a socialist. Well, they're not all socialists. that we can't just use that word unless we're speaking specifically about people who believe in socialist ideology. There is a real definition for that. There's a real definition for communist ideology. And we need to be careful that how we differentiate between the two. I would say it's the same with people on the left who call, said before that I'm a Christian. Some people on the left would call me a bigot just because I'm a Christian. Am I a bigot? No, I am not. I also love my husband, and I love that I currently, at this time in my life, have been able to stay home and take care of my family. And in accordance with my faith, I come alongside him as he is the spiritual head of my home. Some people would say, oh, that's just the patriarchy. Your husband's misogynist. No, there's a definition to misogynist. It's like the aversion or hatred of women. Calling someone a misogynist just because you don't like the idea of a male being put in a leadership position in a home or in some other kind of situation does not mean that they're a misogynist. It's like calling people a racist. Racist has a real definition. You can't just call somebody a racist without knowing whether they're a racist or not. Have you ever been called a racist? Are you one? It's important to think about those things. And when someone calls you a name and you don't know really what it means, look it up. And then talk to them about it and say, you called me this name and I don't appreciate it because that's not who I am. I don't believe those things. I don't, if you've been called a racist, you just tell people. You don't say, no, I'm not a racist. No, find out what the actual definition of racism is, right? Believing that you are better than somebody else, that you're better and that you are higher than somebody else because of the color of their skin. That's what it means. If you don't have that, racism is different than prejudice. I know a lot of people who are prejudiced. And it hurts me to see when people speak in a prejudiced way. I also have met some people who actually are racist. When I moved to Wyoming, I had never heard anyone use the N-word before. I had never ever heard a white person use the N-word before till I moved here. And I heard a white person use the N-word, and I was appalled. I was working a job and I heard someone use it in their group of friends. And now I've heard African Americans use that word around each other before, which still I don't like. I don't like the N-word. It's very derogatory. I don't think anybody should use it, black or white. But that's only my own personal opinion. But when I heard this person use that word, I thought, oh my goodness, I cannot believe they just used that word for real. It made me so mad, and I was ashamed for them. I was ashamed of them for them. And so I know that racism is real. So is prejudice. It is real. But we can't use words like that. And socialism and communism, we can't use words like that unless we're really talking about what it really means. If we use them flippantly, they lose their value. It's like calling everything an existential threat, because that is a word we hear all the time on the news. Everything is an existential threat to this. The drilling is an existential threat to the environment. Well, you know what? Abortion is an existential threat to babies in the womb. How many have been ripped out? 63 million? That's a lot of life that's gone. Someone might say COVID is an existential threat to the world. Well, maybe it is to a certain percentage of the world. But there are other things that are more of an existential threat than that, like communism. So, I think it's important that we use words correctly. Think about what words we use before we use them. In the words of my late grandmother, who gave me my practicality, think before you speak. Think before you speak. It's better to use few words that have meaning than to just run your mouth. Here's a quote by Shakespeare that I love. No legacy is so rich as honesty. So let's be honest with one another in the words we use. Let's be honest. Let's talk to each other in love and without so much vitriol towards one another. Look that word up. Here's a couple of quotes I'm going to end with. The ultimate determinant in the struggle now going on for the world will not be bombs and rockets, but a test of wills and ideas, a trial of spiritual resolve, the values we hold, the beliefs we cherish, and the ideas to which we are dedicated. So true. That is the fight that we are in. For those of you watching this, it's not necessarily, we're not fighting just for our president that we wanted to win, okay? And that goes for either side, left or right. The left is obviously fighting because they want Joe Biden to be elected. And the right is fighting because they wanted Trump to be elected and believe that there was some nefarious things that went on. But it's not just about who is the president. We're fighting a trial of spiritual resolve about values and beliefs that we hold. And unfortunately, we've been so polarized, we can't even talk to each other in a rational way. And that's why I've made this video today, because I think we should. We've got to talk to each other, and we have to use rational conversations and words that mean something in context. There's so much lack of context in today's society. So here's a second quote by the same person. I'll tell you who it is afterwards. So second quote, if we lose freedom here in America, I added that in America part. If we lose freedom here, there is no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And both of those quotes were from Ronald Reagan, one of my favorite presidents. Well said. We struggle with a test of wills and ideals. And if we lose freedom here in America, there's no place to escape to. So be very careful. I would say to the people on the right, keep fighting for your voice to be heard. For the people on the left, please think about what is happening to the people on the right. Are you joyous that people's voice is being shut down? That people aren't able to speak what they believe to be true? What if that happened to you? What if your voice was shot down? What if your social media account was terminated because you said one wrong thing? Is that freedom of speech? It is not. And I think we ought to all be fighting for one another. Because as I said in a video before, I have the right to say what I like, and so do you. You also have the right to say what you like, and we need to fight for each other to keep that right. Because if we don't, everything is lost in regards to the freedom to say what you want to say anymore without repercussions. That's why we fight. That is why we fight. So let's fight for truth by communicating well. Let's use our words properly and carefully and not as weapons to hurt and maim each other, but to use them in context without trying to manipulate. I truly believe that we can speak life back into America. I do. I believe it. See you next time.
Thanks for watching The Practical Patriot. Like and subscribe below.
That's right.